All right, so let's get started here. This is a design session stream that we're doing on All Systems Nominal. It is a game that I am currently developing. Some of you may remember watching me do streams about my design process of this game. Like earlier this year. It's come a long way since then. I've done a lot of work redesigning the game, getting assets for the game, and playtesting the game since I last did a design stream for this game. So, what are the big changes that I made? Well, this game started out basically as a hack of World of Dungeons Turbo, which then integrated some stuff from Blades in the Dark. It integrated some stuff from BattleTech, from Lancer, and I think those were like the main influences, right? And as the game has evolved, I think it started to become something quite different, something quite of its own. So I'll first talk a little bit about my experiences with playtesting. In playtesting, a few things became obvious. The first was that I needed some kind of system to help players visualize combat. What ranges they were at, what ranges enemies were at. After the first session, I implemented that in my second playtest, and that really seemed to help. But going off of the combat system used in World of Dungeons or World of Dungeons Turbo, and using that for a mech game proved to be somewhat unworkable because, well, I shouldn't say it's unworkable. I should say it's kind of unsatisfactory because there's a couple of like major problems we ran into. One is that people just aren't as familiar with mecha games or mecha fiction as they are with D&D. So in a game like World of Dungeons or a game like World of Dungeons Turbo, where the player can fill in a lot of the imaginary world from their own experience with the genre fiction. In a mecha game, there really needs to be more there to help the players have a clear sense of their position relative to the enemies in the combat and what is going on. So even if I take rules that are basically exactly the same as what you would find in any PBTA game out there, and just put, some mecha words around them, people still find that to be a little bit hard to visualize, a little bit hard to interact with. So my original design intent of creating this kind of OSR-ish Wodu Turbo-based mech RPG, I think was not... Well, it was a partial success, I would say. It wasn't a complete failure, and especially when I added a map to the game, a very simple battle map, that it was very much similar to the one that you will find in 3.16. So if we go back to 3.16, this battle map, it was essentially the same kind of thing as this, right? We had close range, near range, far range, and then I added an extreme range for like LRMs, long range missiles. And here we would put the enemies. I could have like mechs, tanks, VTOLs, aerospace fighters, if I was playing in BattleTech, as I am in my playtest. And then all of the player units would would be put into these different range boxes. And that really helped everybody kind of get their head around what was happening in the combat situation. There were some problems with this approach in terms of, say, enemies coming up behind the group, because then when everything is measured in terms of distances, absolute distances from the enemies, that kind of falls apart when you have enemies on both sides, right? So there was a suggestion that I add like an extra box down here at the bottom that was like for flanking units, right? So then you could just say, oh, these guys are flanking you, they're at the back. And that could add some tactical depth. And that's all great. It's fine. The way my game played, it was really quite similar to Vagabonds of David, which is a fantasy Blades in the Dark game, or kind of OSR PBTA Blades in the Dark mashup game, which you can check out on my channel. I both talked about the book, and I also ran a hex crawl using that game. And again, that game works pretty well, using very much similar mechanics. And the reason why I think it works is because people are just so familiar with fantasy stuff. It's easier for them to reckon with this stuff. When it comes to mecha fiction, I don't think that my design was a complete failure. When I added this battle map, this range map, people came out of that second playtest saying, oh, hey, I really enjoyed the combat in this game. This was a lot of fun. And that's something I rarely hear from players in the Gauntlet RPG community. You know, most people in Gauntlet RPG community want character scenes, more character scenes, more character scenes on top of that, then some more character scenes, followed by more character scenes. That's really, really, really what matters to people there. So, I was quite happy that my game system allowed combat to be dynamic enough that it could grab people's attention, trigger their imagination, let them have a good time with combat without getting bogged down in boring crunch. Oh, hey, Blake. Sorry, I didn't see you there. I wasn't looking at chat. Do we need a dramatic intro? Who are we fighting? Why? Where we are? No, I talked about all that stuff. It's more about the sort of moment-to-moment stuff in battle that was kind of an issue. And the range map helped with that. So, as the way the game was set up, it was like, for every action the players took, we'd have a little bit of back and forth negotiation about what kind of position they were in, what was relevant to what they were doing, and then they would act, and then we have resolution, right? It's all fine. It works, but it really reminds me of my experience with those playtests. The first playtest and the second playtest really reminds me of when I was designing Yharnam Shadows, which was the Bloodborne PBTA game that I wrote a couple of years ago. And the first time I wrote that game, my first draft of that game was a hack of Dungeon World. And it was kind of fun, right? It was kind of fun to do combat in that game as though, like, basically I made it so that you had a group of hunters, you were going through chalice dungeons, and you were grabbing artifacts, Sumerian artifacts. But I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, this isn't really what I want to see out of a Bloodborne RPG, a tabletop RPG. I don't want to focus on the combat, because Bloodborne is already a really good combat game as a video game, and I don't need to replicate that as a tabletop game. What I want to do is get at the social dynamics. So I threw out that copy of the game that was based on Dungeon World, and I wrote a new draft of the game based on Urban Shadows. And that was way better. I was like, oh, wow, there's like, I barely need to write any rules for this hack because there's so much in Urban Shadows already that does everything I want, right? Like, it's like, oh, there's so much here. It's great. And you know what? The game turned out a lot better because I made a radical change. And I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with All Systems Nominal right now. The game is not bad. The game is pretty good. But it could be better. It could be better if it was hitting more of the things that the fiction demands, that the genre demands. And I think there are a couple things that are really missing from the game as it stands right now. You know, we've kind of clarified that positioning problem. We've kind of dealt with some of the limitations of the lack of genre knowledge, but there's some things that I needed to change. And one problem we had in the playtests was that players were each doing their own thing. They were each doing their own thing. And that was kind of interesting, you know, like, oh, one guy's up on the hill, he's firing missiles across at a turret, you know, across the canyon. There's another player in the back. She's dealing with some VTOLs that are swooping in to try to attack the lance from behind. You know, everybody's kind of doing their own thing. That's all great. But there's very little in the way of teamwork. Very little in the way of teamwork. So we had the tactical position aspect of play. We had the sort of situational description aspect of play. But we didn't really have the teamwork aspect of play. And so I rewrote the combat system completely from scratch. I threw out everything, and I rewrote the combat system from scratch to focus on teamwork. I wanted to make this game about teamwork because if you are engaged in combat, ranged combat with mechs, you know, if anybody out there has played MechWarrior, of any of the MechWarrior games, you understand that you need to use teamwork in order to succeed. So without having that core element of mech combat, you know, like even if you ever play Front Mission, right? If you play Front Mission 5, Front Mission 4, Front Mission 5, the link system in those games simulates the importance of teamwork to combined arms operations, right? Armored cavalry operations. So I wrote this new system to focus on that because I think it's better that way. So this new system is way more complicated. It's so much more complicated than the old system because it's doing a lot of work. It's just doing a lot more. So let's take a look at what's here. So the new system says, combat in All Systems Nominal focuses on tactical position and teamwork. It proceeds from an engagement roll to a series of engagement stages. The highest ranking PC, that is the commanding officer or the CO, in the player unit declares a goal after the engagement roll and selects a maneuver from a list of options based on their position. So you're going to make the engagement roll, right? It's going to take into account what your situation is, how much advantage you're going to have coming into the engagement. Then the commanding officer is going to pick a maneuver for the team to do. Everybody's going to do it. It's not each person does a separate thing. It's everybody's doing the same maneuver. Each player then decides which range they will take in the maneuver. So each maneuver, for example, here, frontal assault, it has a range limitation of all units in short or melee. So you cannot place your unit, your mech, your PC's mech, you cannot place it at far range or extreme range. You can only place it in short range or melee range. But you're going to pick between one of those two. What weapons they will use. So you'll choose from your list of weapons. And choose a tag relevant to their role action, which can give a bonus to the unit's dice pool. right? So what like what are you doing in this operation or in this maneuver that is assisting with it? If you have a tag like, oh, I have a background in piloting, and you're in a situation where, you know, you say you're on rough terrain or something, that would be significant, then you can use that tag. Next, other advantages and disadvantages are calculated. Then the CO rolls and the position is adjusted up or down. So position is like in the burning wheel, it's like your body of argument. It is basically the HP that your team has in the engagement, but it is something beyond that as well. It does more than HP does. It's not just a tracker of progress, it also determines what your tactical options are. And then finally, you go instead of the CO choosing the next maneuver, it's a PC who had a disadvantageous range in the last stage selects the next maneuver. Why? Well, it's just nice to have somebody who is at a disadvantage get to do something interesting in the next round. And combat is not very long. It ends after 2 rounds or when one side's position is reduced to 0. So it could end in 1 round, but it could also end in 2 rounds. Each player chooses a result according to the unit's failure or degree of success. Okay. I don't know if this is still part... Yeah, I don't think this is part of the game anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that. Oops. Okay. Alright, so you do the engagement roll, and it's going to give you a position. You could get a miss on your engagement roll, a mixed success on your engagement roll, a success, or a critical, just like any other roll in Blades in the Dark. And depending on which one you get, your position is altered. So this is your starting position, like your starting body of argument in Burning Wheel. The enemy position is equal to 10 minus the player position. So the enemy position is always exactly proportional to the player position. You could just use the player position to track things, but I think it's more fun to be able to see that, like, oh, my position is 6 and theirs is 4, right? Like, just having that sense of opposition, I think, helps to make the combat more interesting, even if it's mathematically irrelevant. Okay, so if your position is a 6+, you can choose from these options for maneuvers. And each of them does something a little bit different. They each give you a range to fight at, and they also have a special effect on your position or on the way things are resolved. And if it's 5-, you pick one of these. So if your position goes up or down, your tactical position may change, right? Say you're in a bad position, but then you roll really well. Like, let's say you're at 4, but then you roll really well and you end up at 6. Then in the second round, you can pick a better maneuver to do. So that's pretty much the broad strokes of what's going on. The detailed stuff is here. So the player in charge of the stage, so either the CO or the pilot who was in the most disadvantageous position last stage, selects a maneuver. Player selects each player, so each player, not just one, each player selects a weapon they will use. If the weapon is in optimal range, according to the tags on their sheet, they get +1d to their dice pool. The player can also choose to alpha strike at a cost of 1 heat per extra weapon. They gain +1d for each extra weapon at optimal range. Weapons not at optimal range add no dice. So you don't want to alpha strike with weapons that are not in range because it doesn't do anything. It's only with weapons at optimal range. So there's a little bit of strategizing you can do in your mech creation and a little bit of trade-offs in terms of how many weapons do I have at a given range. The more you specialize in a certain range, the more effective you'll be at that range, but the less effective you'll be at other ranges. And as I said here in this comment, it is necessary for the heat ceiling to be low because otherwise your dice pool can get out of control. Next, each player then declares if they have a tag that can aid in the maneuver, and you only get one. You used to be able to get more than one, but now you can only get one bonus tag in an engagement, in combat. Next, the GM checks if the enemy mecha have any weapons in optimal range, and takes one disadvantage token for each. The GM checks if any environmental or situational factors improve or worsen the PC unit position, and takes advantage and disadvantage tokens accordingly. So the GM is going to build up a pool of advantage and disadvantage tokens, and then if the player's units outnumber, the enemies, the GM takes one advantage token. If they are outnumbered, the GM takes one disadvantage token. Then, having built up this pool of advantage tokens and disadvantage tokens, the GM is going to hand them out to players. So you take +1, +1, -1, -1, -1, +1. That is going to affect the final player dice pool for each player. And then finally, players can choose to spend edge to increase their dice pools. They can get an extra die. Finally, each pilot rolls their dice. They add a success points to the unit pool as follows. So if their highest result was a 1 to 3, they get 0 successes. If it's 4 to 5, they get 1 success. If it's 6, they get 2. And if it's critical, they get 3. Then you sum up all of those success pools together for the whole unit. And the position is adjusted according to the success pool as follows. Additionally, on a 5 to 8, the PC suffer a moderate consequence. On a 4-, they suffer a severe consequence. So maybe somebody's arm gets blown off. You know, I don't know. Maybe somebody gets a scar. Maybe the environmental situation gets worse. That happens. The GM decides on that. Then, the modifiers from the selected maneuver are added to position, and combat proceeds to the second stage, or ends if one side is reduced to 0 position. So the basic stages are set the maneuver, set the range, then choose your tags, then figure out advantage and disadvantage, spend edge, roll, figure out your success pool, add up your success pool, and then finally see what your new position is. It's quite an extended process. And the reason why it is as long as it is because using the roll mechanics, the D6 roll mechanics in Blades in the Dark, if I were to make the dice pool collective instead of individual, the dice pool would just be too big. It would mean that the players would always succeed. So I decided to make individual resolution stage and then a group resolution stage. And you can get a conversion factor from one to the other. I am considering possibly using D10s in this in order to avoid having to do that. So I could maybe just have one group resolution stage and then it would cut out like 3 steps of the resolution process. But I need to get some more experience with any dice or get somebody to use any dice in order to figure out what the optimal numbers are for that to actually work. Because as it is, I'm not really sure. And this method I'm using right now is something I think will actually work without me doing a lot of number crunching. So I'm going to play test that system. Finally, after somebody's reduced to 0 position, or the second round ends, you get the conclusion. And according to your position, the outcome is different. It's just like in Blades in the Dark. You know, did you get a success with a risky position or whatever, right? According to what your position is, you're going to have, you know, catastrophic loss, decisive loss, narrow loss, a deadlock, a narrow win, a decisive victory, or total victory. And if you have a gridlock, there's a little mini game you play to resolve the gridlock. Or the deadlock, sorry, not the gridlock. This isn't a traffic game. Okay, so that's the combat system. That's a new combat system. It is more involved than I would like, but I think because it's only 2 rounds, and it's fairly clear, like there's not a lot of exceptions. There's almost no exceptions to this system. It should be fairly easy to run, and it will just go for 2 rounds and it'll be over. So I expect combat will probably take something like 15 minutes thereabouts to run, 15 to 20. Which is kind of what I'm going for, because I do want to make room for more time being spent in downtime. That was something that came up in playtesting, was that, like, yes, the combat is not bad in this game, however, it does take quite a long time to resolve, and therefore there's not that much time for downtime activities. And of course, you know, playing in the Gauntlet, what you want to focus on is those downtime activities to some extent, because, like, okay, you want one thing, you want player interaction during combat, because you want character scenes during combat, because character scenes are key design feature, right? Like, if we want the game to be fun and successful for my audience, that is very important. And then the other thing we want is we want to have downtime activities that are going to allow players to develop their characters and to get them in scenes with each other. So we were having too much focus on individual combat actions and not enough focus on character interactions. So by speeding up combat, by making sure combat is very interactive between players, and by adding more downtime to each session, I think that we are going to end up with a game that is better suited to my target audience. Now, as a whole, right, my target audience is not just the Gauntlet. However, I think that the players in the Gauntlet are some of the best RPG players out there. They're very savvy, and I think if I can please them, I'm a good ways towards pleasing other players, right? Now, there was a design objective that I had for this game, which was to function as a kind of OSR game for mecha games. Kind of similar to what Fraser Simons did with Veil 2020 for old Cyberpunk games, right? Like Cyberpunk 2020 or possibly Shadowrun. Or of course what like World of Dungeons does, or Macchiato Monsters, you know, or Vagabonds of David, they all have sort of intercompatibility options with old OSR games for, you know, D&D stuff. I wanted to do something similar with like BattleTech, Heavy Gear, Front Mission, you know, like these kind of these older mecha games. I wanted to create a nice fast, accessible system that would allow you to bring the fiction and the setting materials and the supplements that you had from those old games and play them today without getting bogged down. I think this game can still do that, but one thing I decided to do in the original draft, the alpha version of this game, was to use HP, because a lot of OSR games use HP in order to have intercompatibility with D&D products. What I forgot was that BattleTech doesn't actually use HP, right? BattleTech, like the rules and number systems in BattleTech are from a rather different sort of war game than what D&D is based on. And so using those HP systems in this game really didn't provide any advantage to compatibility with those old modules. So I don't really feel like ditching HP in this game is necessarily going to hurt those compatibility options. And that's what I want to do. I want to ditch HP because it doesn't do anything interesting in the game. It's just a very simple progress tracker. And I think I can replace it with something better. It's just going to be a little tricky to design. Okay. So, the first thing we need to think about in replacing HP is what is the default HP, not HP, but what is the default counter going to be? What is the unit and how much of it are you going to start with? So I have a few ideas here. I feel like one option would be to have, so if I look at the new draft of Lancer 1.7, what they've done in that, this is the new version of Lancer that came out recently. They have added something called structure. That gives you your arms and your legs. So if you start with vary by size, heroic tone, or wealth, that's a good point. What I was doing in the original alpha draft of the game was to give everybody a starting HP of 10, and then you could purchase more armor or more HP for your mech if you spent mount points on it. Basically, spent weight on it. And the larger your mech was, the more you had to spend. And I think that can still work, because I'm still going to be using mount points. I'm still going to be using size, right? We still have those mechanics in the game. So if we look at mech creation, you can see like a light mech has 2 primary mount points and 3 secondary mount points, but an assault mech has 6 primary mount points and 10 secondary mount points. And you can fill those up with heat sinks, you can fill them up with armor, you can fill them up with extra HP. But so looking at structure, right, I don't think this is necessarily a great, well, maybe it is a good tracker of something, but I don't, So let's say your starting damage capacity is your left arm, left leg, right leg. You have 4 points that can be destroyed, and then you have your core. So that gives you 5. It gives you basically 5 systems that can be destroyed. And then on top of that, you could add armor, right? So it'd be like in Blades in the Dark, when you use armor, it's not damage reduction, it's ablative. So it would be like, oh, I'm going to spend an armor to soak that hit, right? That's the way Blades in the Dark does it, and I think we can use the same system here. That does mean that armor is very good, right? Because you're going to be able to soak damage equivalent to 20% of your life with 1 armor. So if you're talking about like a game like D&D, that's a pretty significant amount of armor, right? But we can just make armor expensive, and that should be fine, I think. I just realized something, though, that's really important, which is not taking it. So in Mech Ton Zeta, mechs were light, fast, good at dodging, or large, armored, slow. Yes. Yes. Same in this game, right? As it is in the alpha, you have a speed rating, and then you have... So if you're an assault mech, it means that you have a lot of weight, you're slow, so you're always at a disadvantage for speed, and you do a ton of melee damage if you ever manage to get into melee with the enemy. That all works fine. Like, that's perfectly good system. But I realized something, though. If we rely on armor, there's currently nothing in the combat system to take into account speed. Shit. Shit. Because I think it's really important to take into account speed. Otherwise, there's no advantage to having light mechs. There is, yeah, there's actually no, two-hit. There's no to-hit rolls, there's no initiative rolls in this game, as of now. So, and, there's no, lock-on mechanic currently. So I think what we may need to do is, at this point, when the GM is handing out advantage and disadvantage tokens, shit. Feel like you should get advantage if you have a higher speed than the fastest enemy. Or does that even make sense? If you have a higher speed than the fastest enemy, you get advantage, but that doesn't work. No. Shit. This is a tricky one. So when you fire SRM-6 EG-6 missiles, do they all hit? Is there a ratio mechanic? Yes, so one possibility would be if your group has a higher total speed value than the enemies, then you basically get an initiative bonus and your starting position would be better. Right? That could work. I could see that. So the way that the weapons resolution works is just that if you are firing on the enemy from an optimal range, you get a +1d to your roll, and that increases your chance of getting a success that will add into the total group success pool. It does not. There is no individual firing and hit calculation made. It's just a abstracted thing that says, oh, the overall odds of you doing the thing you are trying to do are increased. So if we were to deal with speed before combat, each speed gets a value. You could sum them up. You could sum up the player speed, the enemy speed. And if the player speed was higher, they'd get advantage, or they'd get a bonus to their position. And if it was lower, they'd get a malus to their position. But it should also be a little bit gradated. Like, it should have a little bit of nuance to that, because otherwise there's not really an advantage to being that much faster than the enemy. Is there a role of maintaining changing position on the battlefield? Yes, there is. What happens is essentially each player individually rolls. They get a success or failure, and that gives them a certain amount of points. They add it to a pool, and then the group total position is adjusted based on the sum of their successes. Right? So it's each player rolls, they find out how many points they get, sum all the points together, then the position is adjusted for the next round. And then after that, you change your maneuver, right? You do another maneuver. So if you were doing a ranged bombardment the first time, then maybe if your position got really bad, then you would take cover the next time, right? Like, these are... And then everybody within that maneuver, everybody does a thing within the maneuver. And they roll individually and then sum up their successes together to find out what the final position is, who wins, who loses. That's really strong, though. Every round, light mech gets a flat +2 bonus. That would be really, really strong. I feel like it has to be a group thing. It has to be who has the initiative based on speed, and we'll add it at the start of combat. Just one time. Shit. It's adding more crunch to the game. But... there's no other choice. We have to do it that way. Yeah, yeah, I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, but I think the speed thing is really important, so we do need to have some mechanic for it. So we're going to have another thing to do here, right? It's going to be... combat engagement. The engagement roll proceeds as normal and results in the following positions. Next, the total speed of each side is summed up as follows. Yes, no, there is. The problem with that, though, is that there's a good chance that the speed won't be taken into account into the engagement roll, because it's if you look at the questions in the engagement roll, so is the team well supplied? Does the team have reliable and relevant intelligence? Is the team especially vulnerable to, or is the enemy especially vulnerable to the team's approach? Is the team engaging a strongly held enemy position? Does the team involve does the approach involve an exceedingly complex battle plan? Is the broader operational situation in the team's favor? We could add something to this to say, does the team have a significant speed advantage over the enemy? But, well, the GM can figure that out. Yes, I just think it might be overlooked if we don't explicitly spell out that speed is important. I think that most GMs will forget about it. So I think we might want to add does the team's mecha, or do the team's mecha have a significant speed advantage over the enemy? Plus 1d. Plus, because let's see, if it's yes, 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 that would be 5d6, which is a guaranteed good result. I might need another negative, but I don't really want to add another question. What I like about handling this at the engagement roll stage is that it keeps things very abstract and fast. If we actually do a speed calculation in the start of battle, that will slow things down a little bit. But not that much. I don't know. It's just a matter of like, shit. I think it might be okay the way it is, because if you said yes, 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 that'd be U3d6. Oh, it means like, is their army winning the fight, right? Like, is the operational situation, is it like not just their unit, but like, is their whole army at the strategic level winning the battle, right? Or are they losing? That's the broader operational situation. Morale. Right. So we have on the negative side, strongly held enemy position, exceedingly complex battle plan. We're already dealing with they're outnumbered or not inside of the battle, so we don't need to deal with that here. You know what? I'm gonna go with this, and if it doesn't work, then I will add the speed thing. I will add the speed thing in the next draft. So I'm going to make a note. So, possibly need to add calculation of speed advantage or disadvantage here. Okay. For now, we'll just deal with it at the engagement roll stage and hope that that is good enough. Okay. So we dealt with speed. That's good. That's good. Okay, so now we can go back to this mech creation stuff. So we were going to talk about having basically 5 systems that can be taken out. And if we're going to go with that direction, it's important that the mount points be assigned to specific arms or the body. Or, shit, is it important? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like, oh, my arm is destroyed, and then I have to choose one weapon to remove with it. I think that might make sense. Because you're going to have some games where, like, it's in battle, like, for example, in BattleTech, where weapons are assigned to either the body or the arms, but you also have some games like Front Mission where weapons are only assigned to the arms. They're not assigned to the body. So I think not having each weapon be assigned to a mount, like a specific arm or body mount point, makes sense. Okay. So it'd be like, yeah, if you lose a structure, like an arm or a leg, or if you lose an arm, If you lose an arm, you have to take out one weapon. Shit. So this is the advantage of using HP, because you can abstract out this stuff. But if you use specific arm leg stuff, then it gets a little more complicated. You could make it so that when you pick a weapon, you add a tag to the weapon that just says if it's on the arm, if it's on the body. One weapon per arm rests on body. I think that doesn't work because the problem is then that there's very little advantage to using a heavier assault mech. You want it to have a lot of weapons or something if you have a heavy mech, right? So I think what it'll be is like when you make your weapon, you decide what part of the body it's assigned to, and then that will allow the players and the GM to assign it according to the fiction, right? So if I'm playing front mission and somebody says to me, oh, I want to assign my machine gun to my body, then as the GM I'll say you can't do that because this is front mission, and front mission mecha do not have guns on their body. But if they're playing BattleTech, then I can say, oh yeah, you can do that, no problem. And when a part is destroyed, everything that is assigned with that tag, everything that's assigned with that tag is destroyed as well. So you tag left arm, right arm, and you can't have more than double the weapons from one arm on the other arm, right? You can't have 4 weapons on one arm and then 2 on the other arm. Or no, that doesn't make any sense, so yeah, fuck that. We'll just say you can have as many as you like. Yeah, I think that's fair. That's fine. Okay. Alright, so you're going to choose a weight class. It's going to determine your mount points, your speed, and base melee damage. Fine, that's all okay. Base melee damage is no longer a thing. We're getting rid of that. It's not part of the game anymore. So melee damage is equal to blah, blah, blah. We don't have any of this. So select equipment from the equipment list according to the number of mount points the mech has. Tag each piece of equipment according to its location in the mecha's structure. So for example, right arm, torso. Tag each piece of equipment according to... MechGen takes longer. Not, I don't think it will take longer because we're gonna have less tags in the game. I think it will actually take less time to do this. Tag each piece of equipment according to tag each piece of equipment according to whether of equipment as mounted on the left arm, right arm, or torso of the mecha. Okay. Write 3 special systems for your back model. That should be fine. Calculate starting hit points. Set to max. Okay, there's no hit points. Mech model name, mech manufacturer. Okay. So yeah, we got rid of melee damage, calculations, we got rid of hit points, and we're going to get rid of a number of tags for weapons as well. So there will be some things that are simplified here. It's not all going to be more complicated. Okay, so weapon equipment here. So equipment is divided into primary and secondary systems. Each piece of equipment has a cost in mount points, and the player may allocate their mount points to whatever combination of equipment they wish. Included in the equipment are weapons, armor, and other miscellaneous systems found on the equipment list. Weapons are designed through a creation procedure. Okay, that's all fine still. Equipment has tags that help to determine bonuses and penalties when making rolls. It also may have specific mechanical effects. Sure. Okay, so armor. There are 2 types of defensive systems, armor and damage resistance. Armor reduces incoming damage by 1. When the player takes damage resistance, they choose one type to resist, and the system halves enemy damage rolls of the chosen type. So the question here is, do we still want damage resistance in the game? Because here's the thing, the enemy side will not be targeting specific mecha. So damage resistance probably doesn't actually matter anymore. So I think we need to get rid of it. It's kind of a cool system, and it's a nice import from Front Mission, but I didn't find I was actually using it very much in the game anyway. So I think that I'll probably drop it. So new armor rules. Each stock of armor can be spent by the player by the pilot to prevent the destruction of a structural component of their mecha. Can be spent one for one by the pilot to prevent the destruction of a structural component of their mecha. when armor is spent, it must be restored during maintenance and repairs. Or downtime. Yeah. Okay, vastly simplified the armor rules, right? So ammo, some weapons have the ammo tag. So as a consequence of an engagement phase of a okay, so as a moderate or severe, as part of a moderate or severe consequence, as a moderate consequence or as part of a severe consequence, yeah. So, ammo, as a moderate consequence or part of a severe consequence of an engagement phase or stage. Man, my typing, it's too hot in here. So as a moderate consequence or as part of a severe consequence of an engagement stage, the GM can roll that weapons ammo has been used up. The player marks off this item and is restored when the unit has access to resupply and performs maintenance and repairs. Okay. Yes, what's the difference between SRM and PPC then? Just set damage and range. Loses some flavor if it's all the same. Yes, I agree. I think that that is I agree. However, I think that may be a sacrifice we're going to have to make. Because in BattleTech, the difference between an LRM and a PPC is the difference between a lot of small hits, a lot of it's really just your a trade-off between your chance to hit and the amount of damage done in a single hit, right? If you're talking about a PPC versus an or there's heat, chance to hit, and okay, so yeah, one thing that will be different is that the LRM would take ammo tag, and the PPC would take a hot tag. So that would mean that if you use the PPC, you're going to get more heat. If you use the LRM, you may run out of ammo. That is a difference between those two weapons, which is carried over from BattleTech. the accuracy versus damage trade-off that you get in BattleTech, because damage resistance isn't really a big thing in that game, would not be represented in the game. Yeah. So there's something lost there, but it's not like they're completely identical. Okay. Alright, so weapon creation procedure. A name, the optimal range. Okay, it's the basic optimal range. The damage type, we're removing this. This is not going to be a damage type anymore. Add bonus characteristics. So, is it a heat weapon? Does that matter? No, because you cannot pick a target. If it's a heavy weapon, does that matter? Is there any way to get that to matter in the fiction? We could make it so that a heavy weapon counts as an exploding D6 for successes. Well, this is basically like the PPC thing. Like, does this do a ton of damage, right? Or like the large laser, right? It's not the high impact. You know, like with, for example, with an LRM, right? You have a lot of knockback on an LRM. Yeah. So I think you could get the... You can take a heavy weapon, it costs 2 mount points, but the D6 explodes. At optimal range. At optimal range, the D6 counts as an exploding D6. Okay, so heavy weapon. So add 1 mount point cost for each, unless otherwise stated. So heavy weapon is going to do this. Has a cost of 2. MP cost 2. At optimal range, this D6 explodes upward. Okay, that seems fair, right? Because you only have a 1 in 6 chance of it exploding. But if it does explode, you're pretty much automatically critting. So yeah, that sounds pretty, yeah. Because it doesn't really matter if it explodes more than once upward, because the highest possible result you can get is 2 6s. If you get 2 6s, you crit, and then that determines your success pool. So yeah, so it just gives you a really good chance of critting. That's all it's going to do, that's fine for an MP cost of 2. High impact. So should I add something for making? No, I mean a melee weapon is a melee weapon, right? Like we don't need to overcomplicate that. It's only effective at one range. There's only certain maneuvers that use melee. We don't need to go anything. Okay. Extreme range will cost a mount point to get. That's automatically good. Area of effect. I think we could still use this. What it would do is it would give you plus 1d when using the ranged bombardment maneuver. Yeah. And armor piercing, I think that could still be useful. Maybe. Huh. I think I'll leave that in. It's a thing it's a kind of situational thing that GM could calculate on, but how do you determine how many dice to give? No, I think this needs to go out. As cool as it is. Ooh. Don't think there's any way to make armor piercing really work when you can't target a specific enemy. They can't mark off armor, but the problem is then that would, if you had even one pilot with AP, the whole enemy team wouldn't be able to mark off armor. So what I think this might be is armor piercing plus 1d if the enemy unit has more than one heavy or assault class mecha. I think that's fair. Okay. Because if they have a heavy one, they're going to have armor, right? Like, that's just kind of what goes with the territory. So add penalty characteristics. So hot, sure. Light mech snipers with AP weapons, sure, yeah. Yeah, no problem. You know, AP does cost an extra mount point, but it's possible. You could get like an autocannon 5 or something. If you're playing BattleTech. Yeah. Okay, penalty characteristics. So hot means this means +1 heat heat when firing weapon. Pinprick reduces damage by half. So this would just be... I think it would be -1, or like ineffective against enemy units with more than one heavy or assault class mecha. Ammo gives you the ammo tag, and unreliable is probably not relevant. I think I can get rid of that. Okay. Decide if it is a primary or secondary system. It has more than one tag. It should be primary. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Woof. So damage resistance is not in the game anymore. Hacking module we can keep in there. Shield. Okay, a large one-arm shield may have a blade of armor components useful in frontal assaults. Grants +1 armor. That's all we really need. Okay. Auto repair drones. Emergency use repair drones. Those can be used. So, yeah. Yeah, that's a different kind of mecha game. Can be used in maintenance and repairs to adds +1D in adds +1D. What were we talking about? It's, what is this called? To performing maintenance and repairs. Heat sinks. So currently, heat, if we look at heat, where is that? Did I remove that from the... I think I might have accidentally removed the heat section from the game. Wouldn't jump jets be primary for light and medium? They don't need to be, because as long as their mount point cost is high enough, then the light and medium mechs would be forced. So it ends up working out anyway because they cost a lot of mount points. So it does still restrict your options. Okay. So for some reason, heat is gone here. So what if I look at the old version of this game? Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so it was after... Weird. After melee combat, we had heat. So I'll add this stuff back in. I don't know why it was removed accidentally. And I also need to rewrite Alpha Strike. Okay, so heat went before maintenance and repairs. All right, so heat track is 8 segments. That's too much. Let's say 6. It still might be too much. No, it's still too much. 4? 5. Because if you have... No, is it too much? Maybe 6 is just the right number. Because let's see, if you're firing... If you do a Alpha Strike, well, that's not something we need to take into account. We don't need to take into account heat for the weight class, because if you have a heavier mech, you can buy more heat sinks. So let's say you have you fire 2 hot weapons. That would generate 3 heat. If you did that twice in an engagement, that would put you up to 6. So I feel like 5 segments might be the right amount. To make it matter. I'm going to say 5 to start with. So electronic warfare attacks, environmental hazards. This doesn't matter anymore. Well, maybe... Because the enemies can target individual units, so I think it still actually could work. And overboost, I'm not sure we still need this in the game. However, it might make sense to keep it. You can use it instead of spending edge. Oh, but edge... I feel like we also need to reduce... How many heat, how many mechs in Lance do you want numeric symmetry? Well, there's each mech will have 5 heat, and there's 4 heats or 4 mechs in a lance, so it's a total of 20. I think symmetry is fine because again, it comes down to how many heat sinks you have. Yeah. So an overreduce gives +1d to any action making use of a mech. I think it's still fine because there are some situations where you'd use a mech outside of combat. Yeah. So any action making use of a mech, including combat rolls, and adds 1d6. Yeah, exactly. You gotta push your system to the max, right? Yeah, it's fun. I like it. I want to keep it in the game. And I like having the option of doing something really risky instead of spending edge. And okay, so let's look at the consequences of heat. If a mech overheats, it fills the heat track, one of its pieces of equipment is disabled, and the mech... So, okay, one of its... structures or... No, one of its pieces of equipment is disabled. Oh, I see. Okay, no. One of its pieces of equipment or structures or structural components. One of its structural components is damaged. Then its heat is reduced by 1. The heat track can be cleared completely by performing maintenance and repairs, and can be reduced in battle by 1d6 heat with a heat sink. Environmental and situational factors, such as being on an ice planet, can also reduce heat. Okay. Fine. Good stuff. Alright. So what I need to look at was edge, because I think, given that they're... Well... I think there might be too much edge available to the players. Pilots have a special resource they can spend to boost their rolls called edge. You have a number of edge equal to your rank. Can you walk in a river or lake to cool down? Absolutely. Absolutely you can. So the thing is... There's not really room in the maneuver system to do that anymore. That's a thing that we were definitely doing in the last session of playtesting. But because everybody... This gives me... That's a good point there. I think one thing we might want to do is when we make up this kind of map... where is it? This kind of map here. We can add one environmental tag to each range. Okay? So, say that this here is river. Then, if your mech moves into the near zone... you get a bonus to your heat, right? You get your heat cooled down. But if you're here and you're on a hill, then maybe you get a bonus to roll to attack or something, right? So if we add an environmental tag to each range, that will help to deal with that stuff. without making it so that the players have to take an extra step of resolution to decide to do something special. So I need to definitely add that to the game. I'm going to add something about making the range map next, but I first need to think about edge. So pilots have a special resource they can spend to boost their rolls called edge. You have a number of edge equal to your rank plus 1. So at veteran, you would have 5 edge. You'd only be able to spend 2 edge in combat, and it would always be to your advantage to spend that edge. So that's kind of degenerate. There's definitely the possibility that you will spend edge in downtime, but I think this is still too much. This is too much edge. Because we're not going to have these extended combat sequences anymore where the players are going to be spending edge here and there. It's like combat is only gives you 2 opportunities to spend edge plus resistance rolls you make. And so you'd have it so that the players would almost always be spending edge in at least 1 round. Which is like okay, but it's not that interesting. So we'll at least say it is equal to your rank. So that would put you at 1... 2, 3, and 4. So you start out with 1 edge. If you level up, or you're the CO, you get 2, which means you could do 1 thing out of battle to help out your team, but then also in battle you could spend 1 edge in your 2 rounds. I think this makes sense. I think this should work. I think this is okay. 4 edge is going to be pretty strong, but it's also possible your pilot's just going to die before you you get to veteran. So I think this isn't too bad. Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about then is the... So combat, all this crap we talked about. The next thing that will go under combat is the range map. Oh, it's going to go under combat, so it won't be... Oh, that's fine, we'll just... Like, I don't know, we'll call it like the battle map. All right, yeah, thanks for helping me out here. Good stuff. Okay, so what does 316 say about this range map? I guess it's on 28. Okay, so, to track relative mecha ranges and environmental factors, all systems nominal uses a simple battle map. The battle map shows the number of enemy units, the player mecha positions, and environmental features found at each range the player mecha can occupy. At the start of combat, the GM should add one environmental feature to each range zone, and place markers for each enemy unit in the enemy tokens area, or like enemy forces, let's say enemy forces area. When the CO chooses the first maneuver for the player unit, each pilot places their mech in the range they choose from the maneuver description. In the second round of, in the second engagement stage, pilots move their mecha as necessary according to the new maneuver. The environmental features should be taken into account by the GM. When adding advantage and disadvantage tokens. Okay. So we need to add a picture of the battle map. So this is melee, I think it's short. Melee, short, far, extreme. Okay, so heat is dealt with, equipment is dealt with, maintenance and repairs needs to be dealt with. And then we need to add a section for structures, structural components. And then once that's done, I think the updates are going to be pretty much finished. Okay. Rules for systems recovery of the following procedure. When you perform maintenance and repairs, you can restore. Okay. I think we need to add a maintenance role. Do results. So here's an issue. If we don't have the right material... Shit. So I think it should be like... Is the exact material necessary to perform repairs lacking? Minus 2D. So 1 to 3, we get repairs are ineffective. 0 components restored. 4 to 5. So we'll just say ineffective. Somewhat effective. One structural component restored. Six effective. At most 2 structural components restored. And critical, super effective, all structural components restored. I'll just say acquiring material is important to maintaining the fighting effectiveness of mecha and alpha strike. Blah, blah, blah. Right, okay, awesome. Okay, so last thing we need to do here is write up I notice a piece of art is also missing here. Geez, what else accidentally got deleted? Equipment list, clocks. I think everything's okay. So this was mission clocks, downtime. Oh no, it's still there. Okay. Just a glitch in the system. All right, so the last thing we need to talk about is Um, structural components. Oh yeah, this is got to go under weapon creation. Where is it? Choose a name, choose the optimal range. And the sixth thing is tag okay, let's do it right there. Tag each piece of equipment as mounted on the left arm, right arm, or torso of the mecha. Okay. And where should this go? Maybe armor, ammo. Where's heat? There's heat. So why does combat even go in this section? I think it makes more sense for combat to go after equipment. Yeah. So let's reorganize this. So all this stuff goes here. And I think maintenance and repairs should go here. And this needs to have a page break. This needs to be smaller. So maintenance and repairs. Actually, this should have a... It should have its own page. And yeah, that's better. Okay. Cool. So we reorganize things here, which means we can also put the structural components here. Okay, so each mecha has 5 structural components. Their torso, left arm, right arm, legs. Wait, no, it's only 4. Oh, I see. Left leg and right leg. Yes. Haha. Whew. I'm tired. Yeah, so we don't need to do any of that crap. Just do this. If the so each mecha has 5 structural components with special characteristics. So torso, left arm, and right arm. So torso, what it does is destruction, mecha disabled if destroyed. Left arm, right arm. If destroyed, can mount weapons according to GM discretion. Why don't we do this? Can mount weapons. Left leg and right leg. So mech can only move one range forward or backward. If one is destroyed, if both are destroyed, the so mecha disabled if both are destroyed. Okay. So each mecha has 5 structural components with special characteristics. So that's done. I think that describes pretty much everything. And then structural components can be repaired, restored to full functioning during maintenance and repairs. And the other thing to say is structural components can be destroyed as consequences of combat or other roles, and armor can be used to prevent their destruction once. Okay. All right. So that's been covered. We dealt with structural components. We dealt with heat. We dealt with equipment. We just need to deal with, I think the last thing is talents. So once per out mission, avoid a bad outcome. Okay. Change this to +1D recovery. So you gain +1D at melee range and gain +1d engaging in hand-to-hand combat outside your mech. You get +1d to all range combat rolls. Okay. You are expert in this. Create central locks on your enemy units. What does that look like? How can you do that? Okay, so you are an expert at noticing subtle changes in sensor readings and can create sensor locks on enemy units as an alternative to rolling during one engagement stage of combat. A sensor lock grants each pilot +1d in the next engagement stage. Maybe overpowered, but I'll give it a shot. Okay, your scar track is extended by 1. You get +1d to your resource rolls. You get +1d to rolls on longer projects that are 6 segments or longer. And Aegis. Your mecha has +1 armor. That's pretty strong. Those all feel really strong. Okay. And then I just need to make some minor changes to combat. So players can choose to spend edge or overed boost to increase their dice pools. And that should be unless attempting a sensor block. Okay. And subsequently, certain weapon systems will give special dice bonuses at according to their tags. So, example, heavy weapons add 1 exploding d6 to the pool. To the dice pool. Okay. So I think some changes need to be made to downtime, but combat and stats have been fixed. And I just need to, I also need to remember to fix up the hyperlinks in the text. And we'll just add a quick thing. The maintenance role. Maintenance role is only conducted as a part of and repairs. And add a hyperlink for that. It is used to restore damaged structural components. Okay. I think we're good. We're good. We did the thing. And we made that change to downtime. The paths get 2 downtime actions. Okay, so we need a picture of the battle map. Right. Hidden information. The GM reveals all enemy units to the pilots, or to the players, unless otherwise specified by tags. Invisible, or like cloaked, etc. Cloaked. The CO select some error. Okay. Okay, I think this is a game. We're still at 19 pages, which is making me feel good. It's making me feel good. Last thing to add, All Systems Nominal is a role-playing game for 4 players. For one game master. It's really important. Cool. Yes, if you do not have exactly 4 players and 1 game master, the combat system doesn't work. So hidden information is dealt with. Good. Good, 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 good. It's almost finished. I just need to make a picture of the combat map. And we're done. Yes. Good stuff. All right, well, for any of you who are still watching, thanks for checking out this stream. It's been very productive. And I think we're pretty much good to go for the next playtest. Obviously, the character sheets are going to need to have a ton of reworking. It's going to be a complete mess, but I think basically the combat systems there, the stats have all been polished. and we're getting really close to like a proper beta release. So I'm excited, and I'll see you around for another stream.